Margaret Porter lit the lamp at first dawn. Frost covered the schoolhouse windows in lace patterns. The flame caught, steadied, and threw its small circle of light across the cold room. Behind her, in the two adjoining rooms she'd converted to sleeping quarters, 12 children lay under whatever blankets she'd managed to collect. Half were orphans with nowhere else to go. The rest came from families too poor to feed them daily. She'd stopped counting how many nights she'd given up her own supper so they could have seconds. The floorboards creaked as she moved to the stove. Her breath plumed white in the air. She fed kindling into the firebox, struck a match, and waited for the wood to catch. The children would wake soon. They'd need warmth and food before lessons began. While the room slowly heated, Margaret prepared porridge in the large pot she'd bought with last month's teaching wages. She measured the oats carefully. There was enough for today. Tomorrow would require its own provision. 7-year-old Emma's dress hung over a chair, the sleeve torn again. Margaret sat by the lamp and threaded her needle. Her fingers moved automatically through the mending. She'd sewn this same tier twice before. The fabric was wearing thin. The lamp's glow caught the children's drawings pinned to the walls. Houses with smoking chimneys. Families holding hands. Horses and dogs and sunshine. The things they dreamed about. Margaret's gaze drifted to the small table where she took her meals alone. One chair, one plate, one cup. She'd long since stopped imagining what it might feel like to share breakfast with someone. A sound from the sleeping room's Emma stirring. The child appeared in the doorway, shivering in her thin nightgown. "Is there enough breakfast? Miss Margaret?" Margaret set down the mending. "There's always enough. Sweetheart, go back and stay warm. I'll call you when it's ready." Emma hesitated. "You'll eat too." "Of course I will." The lie came easily now. She'd become practiced at moving food around her plate while the children ate. They never seemed to notice. Emma returned to bed. Margaret stood and walked to the door. Through the frost-glazed window, she could see dawn breaking over the town. Gray light. Cold sky. Another day to survive. She touched the door frame, then each frame of the sleeping rooms as she passed, a ritual she'd developed without thinking, as if her hand could somehow protect them. 12 voices would wake soon, 12 souls depending on her. The weight of it pressed against her chest like a stone. "One more day," she whispered to the empty room. She straightened her shoulders and returned to the stove. The porridge was beginning to bubble. Behind her, the children began to stir. Morning sounds filled the small schoolhouse. Yawning. Whispers. The shuffle of feet on cold floors. Margaret ladled porridge into bowls. She arranged them on the table. She called the children to breakfast. They came, one by one, sleepy-eyed and grateful. She watched them eat. Their faces relaxed as warmth spread through them. This was enough. This moment. This morning. It had to be enough. Harrison Lockwood arrived at the schoolhouse just after the noon meal. Margaret saw him through the window, tall and purposeful, his expensive coat marking him as someone from another world entirely. She'd come to know him over the past 3 months. He attended the same church. He walked past the schoolhouse on his way to town. Sometimes he stopped to speak with the children playing outside. His son Daniel had joined them twice for nature lessons. He'd been kind, patient, respectful of her work and her independence, but she'd never expected this. "Miss Porter, might I speak with you?" Margaret stepped outside, pulling her shawl tight against the October wind. 12 faces pressed against the schoolhouse windows, watching. Harrison removed his hat. His hands turned it in a slow circle. "I've been thinking about what I want to say for weeks now. I'm just going to speak plain. I appreciate plain speech. Mr. Lockwood, I'd like you to marry me." The words hung in the cold air. Margaret felt her breath catch. She'd wondered if this might come. Part of her had hoped for it, but hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Mr. Lockwood." "Harrison, please." "Harrison." She met his eyes. I'm honored, truly. But I can't. He didn't flinch. May I ask why? Margaret gestured toward the schoolhouse. Them. I can't abandon my students. Half are orphans boarding here. I'm all they have. If I married you, what would happen to them? Bring them with you. She stared at him. Would bring them all. My estate has rooms standing empty. They need a father, as much as my son needs a mother. Margaret felt something twist in her chest. That's 12 children. Harrison? 12. You can't possibly mean that. I've never meant anything more in my life. She studied his face, searching for uncertainty. For the moment when reality would settle in and he'd realize what he was suggesting, he didn't waver. You don't understand what you're offering, she said quietly. These aren't quiet, well-behaved children from good families. They're loud and wild and damaged. Some wake up crying in the night, some fight, some steal food because they're terrified of going hungry. You have no idea what you'd be taking on. Then help me understand. Let me try. Behind them. Emma's face pressed against the window. Her small hands framed her face as she watched. Margaret shook her head. I can't let you do this. You'll wake up in a month and regret it. And where will that leave them? They've been abandoned enough. I won't regret it. You say that now. Harrison put his hat back on. I'm not asking for an answer today. I'm asking you to think about it. That's all? Just think. He turned to leave, then paused at the gate. He looked back at the schoolhouse, at the children's faces in the windows, at Margaret standing alone in the cold. My estate has empty rooms, he said again. Empty rooms in a house that's been too quiet for too long. Think about it, Margaret. Please. He walked away. Margaret watched him go. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Inside, 12 children waited for her. She could hear them calling her name. She closed her eyes, let herself imagine it for just a moment. A real home, warm rooms, enough food, a partner to share the burden. Then she opened her eyes and went back inside. Impossible things were called impossible for a reason. Harrison sat in his library that evening. A glass of whiskey untouched on the table beside him. The fire crackled in the hearth. The house creaked around him, empty and vast. Daniel appeared in the doorway, 11 years old and too quiet for a boy his age. Father, are you all right? Harrison gestured to the chair across from him. Come sit with me, son. Daniel settled into the chair. He'd been a cheerful child before his mother died. 3 years had passed since then. The boy had never quite recovered his laughter. I asked Miss Porter to marry me today, Harrison said. Daniel's eyes widened. What did she say? She said no. Why? Harrison studied his son's face. Because of her students. The ones who live with her, she won't leave them behind. The orphans? Yes. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then, I was at the orphanage before Mother adopted me. Did you know that I did? Do you remember what it was like before someone chose you? Harrison's throat tightened. Every day. He'd never spoken to Daniel about his own childhood. The boy knew the basic facts. Harrison had grown up in a state orphanage, worked his way up from nothing, made his fortune through determination and luck. But Daniel didn't know about the cold nights, the hunger that never quite went away, the feeling of being invisible, unwanted, the certainty that no one would ever choose him. Miss Porter's students, Daniel said slowly. They're like we were. Yes. Then we should help them. Harrison leaned forward. Bring them here, all of them. We have so many empty rooms. From a child's mouth. It sounded so simple, so obvious. Harrison stood and walked to the window. The moon hung low over the grounds, acres of land, a house with 20 rooms, most of them closed off, gathering dust. His late wife Elizabeth smiled at him from the photograph on the mantel. She'd wanted more children. They'd planned to fill this house with laughter and life. Then she died, and the house became a mausoleum. "What if I could prove to Miss Porter that I'm serious?" Harrison said quietly. What if I built them a proper home here? What if I showed her I meant every word?" Daniel stood. "You'd do that?" Harrison turned to face his son. "I would. For them. For you. For myself. For the boy you were." Daniel said softly. "Yes, for him too." Harrison crossed the room and pulled his coat from the hook. "I'm going to see the town architect. Tonight. Now, before I lose my nerve." He paused at the door and looked back at his son. Daniel stood straighter than he had in months. Something had woken in the boy's eyes. Hope. Maybe. Or purpose. "If I do this," Harrison said, "everything changes. This house stops being just ours. We'd be sharing it with 12 children who've known nothing but hardship. It won't be quiet anymore. It won't be orderly. Are you ready for that?" Daniel smiled. The first real smile Harrison had seen from him in 3 years. "I'm ready, Father." Harrison nodded once and stepped into the night. The moon lit his path to town. Behind him, the empty house waited. Soon, if all went as he hoped, those empty rooms would finally serve their purpose. They'd become home. Construction began the following Monday. Margaret heard the hammering before she saw the wagons rolling past the schoolhouse. Lumber. Workers. The whole town seemed to be talking about Harrison Lockwood's new project. She tried to ignore it. She had lessons to teach and children to feed, whatever Harrison was building. It had nothing to do with her. Then he appeared at her door on Wednesday afternoon, a roll of papers tucked under his arm. "May I show you something?" The children gathered around as he spread the architect's drawings across her teaching table. 12 pairs of eyes went wide. "This is the dormitory wing," Harrison said, pointing. 12 beds here, a classroom here, twice the size of what you have now. A common room with a fireplace large enough to warm everyone at once. 10-year-old Thomas traced his finger along the drawing. "Is this real?" "It will be by Christmas, if the weather holds." Margaret stared at the plans. Her throat felt tight. "Harrison, I'm hiring 2 additional teachers to help you," he continued. "One for music, one for practical skills. And there's space here for a library. We'll need books, of course. I thought you might help me choose them." Emma tugged on Margaret's sleeve. "Can we really go there? Miss Margaret?" Margaret couldn't find her voice. Harrison met her gaze across the table. "I told you I was serious. This is me being serious. Or, why," the word came out broken. "Why would you do this?" He didn't answer right away. He looked at the children's faces, at their threadbare clothes and hungry hope, at the cramped schoolhouse with its drafty windows and worn floor. "Because someone should have done it for me," he said finally. "When I was their age, someone should have built me a home instead of a prison. Someone should have chosen me instead of forgetting me." The children watched him with solemn faces. They understood. They'd lived the same story. Margaret's hands shook as she studied the drawings. A dormitory, a proper classroom, heat and space and safety. "You'd really do this." "I'm already doing it. The foundation was laid yesterday. The walls go up next week. And you still want me to marry you, yes. But even if you don't, I'm still building this. Those children need a home. Whether you become my wife or not, they'll have one." Silence filled the small room. Outside, the sound of hammering continued. Thomas looked up at Margaret. "Miss Margaret, is this real?" She touched the boy's head gently. "I think it might be." Harrison rolled up the drawings. Before he left, he paused at the door. "There's one more thing. I'd like Daniel to spend his afternoons here with you, learning alongside your students. He's lonely. Margaret, he needs this too. Of course, she said. Anytime. After he left, the children erupted in whispers and excitement. Margaret sank into her chair. Her vision blurred with tears she couldn't explain. Emma climbed into her lap. Are you sad, Miss Margaret? No, sweetheart, I'm just surprised. But it was more than surprise. It was the slow, terrifying sensation of hope taking root. And hope, she'd learned long ago, was the most dangerous thing of all. November arrived with the first snow. The dormitory walls rose steadily against the gray sky. Margaret found herself walking past the estate on her way to town, watching the progress, trying to believe it was real. Harrison established a workshop in one of his barns. He invited the older boys to learn woodworking on Saturday mornings. Margaret brought them, intending to wait outside. Come in, Harrison said. It's cold out there. She stepped into the warm workshop. The smell of sawdust and wood oil filled the air. Harrison moved among the boys, his hands guiding theirs on planes and saws, patient, present, genuinely engaged. Thomas struggled with a birdhouse he was building. The walls came out crooked. He started to cry in frustration. Harrison knelt beside him. Son, the birds won't mind. Let's make it beautiful in its own way. Together, they adjusted the angles, made something intentionally imperfect. By the end, Thomas was smiling. Margaret watched from the doorway. She'd seen wealthy men perform charity before. It always looked like performance. This didn't. Harrison noticed her watching. Coffee. She followed him to the main house. They sat in the kitchen while the boys worked. Daniel joined them, comfortable now with the other children. You grew up in an orphanage, Margaret said. It wasn't a question. Harrison wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. State institution in Pennsylvania. Cold building. Colder people. We were mouths to feed. Nothing more. I'm sorry. The day I turned 16, they put me out on the street with $5 and wished me luck. I slept in alleys for 2 months before I found work. Margaret studied his face. The success he'd built hadn't erased those years. She could see them in the set of his jaw, the way his eyes grew distant. I swore if I ever had money, I'd use it better than that. He continued. But then Elizabeth died, and I forgot how. This house became a place to hide instead of a place to live. Until I met you. Harrison. Your students reminded me. He said, they reminded me that children deserve more than survival. They deserve to be chosen, to be wanted. To have their names carved into something permanent? She didn't understand the last part. But before she could ask, he stood. Come with me. He led her to the workshop. On a shelf sat 12 small wooden boxes. Each was simple but well made. Each had a name carved into the lid. Emma, Thomas, Samuel, Rebecca, all 12 children. The boys are making these, Harrison explained. Boxes for their belongings, something that's theirs, that no one can take away. Margaret ran her finger over Emma's name. The letters were deep and clear, permanent. You carved these, each one. I wanted them to know someone took the time, that they matter enough for careful work. Her vision blurred. She turned away, blinking hard. Harrison's hand touched her shoulder gently. Margaret, I'm fine. You're not. Talk to me. She faced him. I've been carrying them alone for so long. And you just walked in and started building them a home. Like it was the most natural thing in the world. It should be. That's the problem. It should be natural to care for children who need caring. But we've made it complicated. I'm falling in love with you, she said suddenly. The words escaped before she could stop them. Harrison went very still. Margaret. And it terrifies me. Because what if you change your mind? What if this is temporary? I can't survive watching them lose another home. I won't change my mind. You say that now. I'll say it every day until you believe me. Outside, the boys called that they'd finished their work. The moment broke. Margaret pulled her shawl tight and went to gather them. But as they walked home through the snow, Emma slipped her hand into Margaret's. Mr. Lockwood is kind, isn't he? Margaret looked back at the estate. Harrison stood in the workshop doorway, watching them go. Yes, sweetheart, she said quietly. He is. The words felt like admission, like surrender, like the beginning of something that might break her heart or save it. She wasn't sure which terrified her more. December came hard and fast. The temperature dropped. Snow piled against the schoolhouse walls. Margaret's woodpile dwindled faster than she'd planned. She stood in the small pantry one morning, counting what remained: flour, beans, a little salt pork, not enough to feed 13 through winter. Her hands trembled as she did the arithmetic. She could stretch the food for 6 weeks, maybe 8 if she skipped more meals. But after that, she'd have to send some children away. The thought made her sick. Which one's the oldest? Who could work the youngest? Who might be adopted? How did you choose which children to abandon that afternoon? Thomas developed a cough. Then Rebecca. Then Emma. The cold had gotten into the schoolhouse. Margaret boiled water for steam and tried to keep the children warm. But the stove couldn't heat the whole space properly. She lay awake that night, listening to them cough, calculating how much a doctor would cost, whether she could afford medicine and food both. When dawn came, she found crates stacked by her door, food supplies, warm blankets, split firewood, neatly stacked, the envelope containing money for a doctor. Margaret's legs nearly gave out. She sank onto the doorstep, the envelope shaking in her hands. He'd done this. Harrison. Somehow he'd known. She found him at the estate that afternoon. He was supervising the installation of windows in the dormitory. I can't accept charity, she said without preamble. Harrison climbed down from the ladder. Good afternoon to you too. I'm serious. Harrison, I can't. It's not charity. It's partnership. We're not partners. We're not even. She stopped herself. Not even what married know. We're not. But I'm asking you to trust me anyway. Those children are cold and getting sick. You can't feed them through winter. Let me help. And what does that make me? Someone who depends on your generosity. Someone who accepts help when it's offered. His voice was firm now. Someone brave enough to admit she can't do everything alone. Margaret's throat tightened. The town is talking. The council member stopped by yesterday. He questioned whether it was proper for an unmarried woman to accept so much from a widower. Let them talk. Easy for you to say. You're not the one they're calling. She stopped. Harrison's jaw set. What are they calling you? It doesn't matter. Tell me. She met his eyes. They're saying I'm using the children to trap you, that I'm compromising my reputation to secure your money, that I'm not fit to teach if I can't maintain propriety. The silence between them felt heavy as stone. I'll speak to the council, Harrison said finally. Don't. It'll only make it worse. So what do you want me to do? Stop helping let those children go cold and hungry because people gossip. Margaret wrapped her arms around herself. The wind cut through her thin coat. Inside the dormitory, she could see the completed classroom, the beds waiting, the fireplace that would keep them warm. Everything she needed. Everything they needed. Right there, within reach, and she was too afraid to take it. I don't know, she whispered. I don't know what to do. Harrison stepped closer. Trust me, that's all. Just trust me. That night, Emma's cough worsened. Margaret sat beside her bed, pressing cool cloths to the child's forehead. The doctor had come paid for by Harrison's money and left medicine. Am I going to die? Miss Margaret. No, sweetheart, you're going to get better. Promise. Margaret smoothed the girl's hair. I promise. But as she sat there in the dark, listening to 12 children breathe, she wondered how many more promises she could keep. Margaret stood at the estate gates on a bitter January morning. The dormitory was complete. Windows gleamed. Smoke rose from the chimney. Inside, everything waited. She'd come to tell Harrison she couldn't do this. He met her at the door. Margaret, come in. You're freezing. I can't stay long. Then let's not waste time. He led her through the main house to the new wing. Each step felt heavier than the last. She wanted to turn back, to run, to choose the safety of struggle over the risk of hope. Harrison opened the first door. This is the girls' dormitory. 6 beds lined the walls. Each had a quilt in different colors. A small table stood between each bed. Curtains hung on the windows, real curtains, not threadbare scraps. The town women made the quilts, Harrison explained. I commissioned them, each one different, so the girls could choose their favorites. Margaret touched the nearest quilt. Soft, warm, beautiful. And here, he opened another door. The boys' dormitory. 6 more beds. The same care taken, everything ready. He showed her the classroom. Books lined the shelves, new books, not donated cast-offs. Maps hung on the walls. Desks stood in neat rows. A globe waited on the teacher's desk. The common room had the promised fireplace, large enough to heat the entire space. Chairs and a sofa faced it. A rug covered the floor. Margaret stood in the center of the room. She turned slowly, taking it all in. Her hands trembled. And one more thing, Harrison said quietly. He led her to the workshop. On the shelf sat the 12 wooden boxes. He picked up Emma's and opened it. Inside was a small china doll. Simple but lovely. I put something in each box, Harrison explained. Something just for them. So they know this isn't conditional. They don't have to earn these gifts. They're theirs because they exist. Because they matter. Margaret picked up Thomas's box. Inside, a set of carved wooden horses. Rebecca's held a silver brush. Samuel's, a pocket knife with his initials. Each box contained something chosen specifically for that child. You did this for all of them, each one. Her vision blurred. Why, Harrison set down the box he was holding. Come here. He led her back to the dormitory. Stopped at one bed. Ran his hand along the frame. I was 7 when they brought me to the orphanage. They put me in a room with 40 other boys. I didn't have a bed. I slept on the floor for 3 months. When one finally opened up, no one told me I could use it. I just started sleeping there and hoped no one would kick me out. His voice was steady, but his hand gripped the bed frame tight. No one ever gave me anything. No one ever chose me. When I left at 16, I didn't own a single thing that was truly mine. Not a shirt, not a book, nothing. He turned to face her. I can't undo what happened to me, Margaret, but I can change what happens to them. I can give them what I never had. Someone who chooses them. Someone who says, this is yours. Someone who carves their name into something permanent. Margaret's walls crumbled. 3 months of holding back, of protecting herself, of refusing to believe. It all broke. She put her hands over her face and wept. Harrison didn't touch her. He just stood there, steady, present, waiting. When she could breathe again, she lowered her hands. I've been so afraid, she said. Afraid to hope, afraid to trust, afraid I'd choose wrong and fail them. You won't fail them. We won't fail them. How can you be sure? Because we've been them. We know what it costs to be forgotten, We won't forget. Through the window. A crocus pushed through the snow. The first sign of spring. Winter breaking after months of cold. Margaret looked at Harrison. Really looked at him. Saw not the millionaire. Not the factory owner. Just the man who'd spent 3 months building a home for children who'd never had one. Ask me again, she said quietly. Harrison's breath caught. What? Ask me again. The question you asked in October. He stepped closer. Margaret Porter, will you marry me? Will you bring your 12 students home? Will you help me be the father? I never had. Yes. The word came clear. Strong. Sure. Yes, she said again. To all of it. Yes. Harrison closed his eyes when he opened them. They were bright with tears he didn't bother to hide. Outside, the crocus bloomed. Inside, empty rooms waited to be filled. And between them, 2 people who'd carried burdens alone reached for each other's hands. The Sunday dinner happened 3 weeks later. Margaret had insisted on it. One meal with everyone together before she gave her final answer. Harrison agreed immediately. Whatever you need. Now Margaret stood in the estate's kitchen, watching controlled chaos unfold. 12 children raced through rooms that had been silent for years. Their voices echoed off high ceilings. Their footsteps thundered on polished floors. Daniel helped set the table. He moved easily among the other children now. His loneliness had lifted like fog in sunshine. Emma discovered the library. Miss Margaret. There are hundreds of books. Thomas found the workshop. Mr. Lockwood, can we build something today? Rebecca stood in the dormitory, touching her quilt with reverent fingers. Harrison carved the roast with steady hands. He'd cooked the meal himself with Daniel's help. Pot roast. Roasted vegetables. Fresh bread from the baker in town. Apple pie for dessert. Everyone to the table. Margaret called. They came running. 13 children, 12 hers, 1 his. They crowded around the dining table. Harrison had added extra boards to make it long enough. The meal began in chaos. Spilled milk. Arguments over who sat where. Emma asked to see every room in the house. Thomas wanted to know if they could have a dog. But slowly, the chaos settled into something else, into conversation, into laughter, into the sound of family. Margaret watched Harrison. He served food, answered questions, refereed minor disputes, told terrible jokes that made the younger children giggle. This wasn't performance. This was him, patient, present, genuine. After the meal, the children explored while Margaret and Harrison cleaned the kitchen. They worked in comfortable silence, washing, drying, putting away. Through the window, they could see Daniel teaching Emma a card game, Thomas reading to the younger children, Rebecca helping Samuel with his arithmetic. They fit. Margaret said softly. Harrison dried his hands. They do. I've been watching you all evening, waiting for you to look overwhelmed, to realize what you've taken on, and you look happy. He set down the towel. I am happy. For the first time in 3 years, this house sounds the way it's supposed to sound. They walked onto the front porch. The sun was setting. Cold air bit at their faces. But inside, the house glowed with warmth and light and voices. Margaret started to cry. She didn't try to stop it. Harrison waited. I've been so afraid, she said finally. Afraid to hope. Afraid to trust. Afraid I'd choose wrong and fail them. You haven't failed anyone. Margaret. But what if I did? What if I let myself believe this? And then what I disappear, I change my mind. I reveal myself to be a liar. He turned her to face. Him. Margaret, look at me. She did. I built a dormitory. I hired teachers. I carved 12 names into boxes. I spent 3 months proving I meant what I said. What else do I need to do? Nothing. You've done everything. That's what terrifies me. You're real. I am real. You're not choosing me instead of them, she said. You're choosing all of us together. Yes, all of us. One family. That's what I'm choosing. Inside, Emma's laughter rang out, followed by Daniel's, then all 13 children at once. Harrison squeezed Margaret's hand. This is what home sounds like. This is what it should have always sounded like. Margaret leaned into him, let herself feel the warmth of his presence, the steadiness of his shoulder, the truth of everything he'd built. Harrison Lockwood. Yes, I'll marry you. I'll bring all 12 children home. I'll help you be the father you never had. He pulled back to look at her. You mean it? I mean it. With everything I have. I mean it. He kissed her then, gentle, reverent, the kind of kiss that sealed promises. When they pulled apart, the sun had set. Stars emerged in the winter sky. Through the windows behind them, the estate glowed with light and life. When Harrison asked, "Soon, before I lose my nerve?" He laughed. You won't lose your nerve. You're the bravest person I know. They stood together as night fell. The sounds of 13 children floated through the open door. Home. Family. Everything they'd built from empty rooms and open hearts. Margaret rested her head against Harrison's shoulder. What happens now? Now, he said quietly. We start our life together. The wedding took place on the first day of April. Spring had come early. Crocuses bloomed in the estate gardens. Trees showed the first green hints of leaves. Margaret stood in the common room, wearing a simple dress of pale blue. No veil, no elaborate ceremony. Just her and Harrison and 13 children and the minister from town. Emma held Margaret's small bouquet wildflowers picked that morning. Daniel stood beside his father, straight-backed and smiling. The other children sat in chairs arranged in a semicircle. Their faces shone with scrubbed cleanliness. They wore new clothes, Harrison's gift, purchased a week ago. The ceremony was short. Traditional vows with one addition. When the minister asked if they took each other, Harrison and Margaret answered together, "We choose this family." Not just each other, the whole family. All 15 of them. When the minister pronounced them married, 13 children erupted in cheers. The celebration lasted all afternoon. A simple meal. Games in the garden. Music played on the old piano in the parlor. Laughter and chaos and joy. As evening fell, Margaret found herself standing in the doorway of the dormitory wing. The children were settling for the night. She'd read stories to the younger ones. Harrison had helped the older boys with their evening routine. Now they moved through the quiet rooms together, tucking in blankets, answering last questions, offering goodnight kisses. Emma called out, "Mama Margaret." Margaret paused. The child had never called her that before. "Yes, sweetheart. The biscuits are for breakfast tomorrow, right? Not tonight." Margaret smiled. "Right. Tomorrow. Just checking. Good night. Mama Margaret. Good night. My love." Harrison touched her shoulder. She turned into his embrace. Behind them. The children's breathing settled into sleep rhythms. "Mama Margaret," he said softly. "I like that." "So do I." They walked through the house, checking windows and doors. The estate had transformed over the past months. Empty rooms now held beds and books and toys. Hallways echoed with footsteps and voices. The kitchen always smelled like baking bread. In the parlor, they sat together on the sofa. The fire burned low in the hearth. Comfortable silence surrounded them. "Do you remember that morning in October?" Margaret asked. "When you proposed every detail." "I thought you were mad." "I probably was. A little bit." She laughed, leaned into him. "I'm glad you were mad. I'm glad you didn't listen when I said no." You weren't saying no. You were saying, prove it. And you did. Harrison kissed the top of her head. We did. Together. Through the window, dawn began to break. The same dawn that had greeted Margaret in that cold schoolhouse last October. But everything had changed. The empty rooms were full now. Not just with furniture, but with voices. Laughter. Purpose. Life. Margaret stood and walked to the window. Harrison joined her. Together they watched the sun rise over the estate grounds. 14 children slept safe and warm in beds that belonged to them, in rooms that would always be theirs. Home ain't a place, Harrison murmured. Margaret finished the thought. It's the people you choose, and the people who choose you back. She turned to face him, saw in his eyes the same wonder she felt. They'd both been alone. Both carried wounds from childhoods marked by abandonment and loss. But they'd found each other, and in finding each other, they'd created something neither could have built alone. A family, not born of blood but forged from choice, from courage, from the radical decision to say yes to love even when fear whispered no. What are you thinking? Harrison asked. Margaret smiled. That 12 children needed a father, and that a millionaire needed to remember why empty rooms should be filled, and that somehow, impossibly, we found each other. Not impossibly, inevitably. You sound very sure. I am sure. We were always meant to find each other. We just had to be brave enough to build something new. Footsteps sounded above them, the children beginning to wake. Soon the house would fill with morning noise. Breakfast would need preparing. Lessons would need teaching. Life would need living. But for this moment, they stood together in the quiet dawn. Two people who'd survived being unwanted, who'd learned to hope again, who'd opened their arms wide enough to hold 12 forgotten children and make them family. Ready for another day? Harrison asked. Margaret took his hand, squeezed it tight. With you always. They walked together toward the kitchen, toward the sound of children waking, toward the life they'd chosen. Behind them, the sun rose higher. Spring light flooded through the windows. And in every room of the great house, love had finally found its home.